Sora's inclusion into Smash Ultimate, and thereby the completion of that game's DLC, is over a year in the rearview. The significance of this inclusion stretched beyond just Ultimate, however. At a gargantuan 89 characters, the final roster feels like a definitive ending point for not just this game, but Smash Bros. On the whole. Ultimate was pitched from the outset as a sort of culmination of everything the series had been up until that point, so I don't think the approach the series has taken up until now, of each sequel expanding out from the previous entry with maybe a cut character or mode here or there, is feasible in this case. It's yet to be seen what Nintendo will do when they attempt to make a new Smash game, but I don't think it's controversial to say that Ultimate's going to cast a huge shadow over it. Regardless, it's gonna be a few years, and I see Nintendo wanting to find something similar to fill in the gap, if for no other reason than that Smash brings the hype and keeps people talking. There's been rumors flying around for a bit that the next Mario Kart is going full force towards the crossover angle, but I've got another idea for something to occupy that gap. Capcom's fighting game division could use some goodwill right now, so bringing in a new collaborator for a versus game seems like a good way to do that. So, Nintendo vs. Capcom then? When approaching this roster, it's very easy to fall back on Smash Bros. And the various Capcom fighters to fill out my picks. There's definitely some familiar faces among the cast here, but I've also made an effort to differentiate with some more off-the-wall picks. This is its own game, and I want it to have its own identity apart from the games that it may bring to mind. With that said though, I'm gonna go rapid fire through some of the more obligatory, to-be-expected picks. Starting with the Nintendo characters, I'm bringing in Mario, Link, Donkey Kong, Samus, Kirby, and Pikachu. All members of the original 12, these 6 will occupy similar niches that they do in Smash. Mario is the all-rounder, Samus is a hard-hitting zoner, and Pikachu is a fast rushdown fighter. With that said, I want to take advantage of the new setting and bringing elements that Smash hasn't tapped into. For example, Donkey Kong has always been able to pick up other fighters with his up throw, but Nintendo vs. Capcom will take this much further by making him a straight-up grappler. Taking advantage of his new abilities from Tears of the Kingdom, and some of the more kooky items from series past like the Beetle and Spinner, Link will function a lot closer to something like Duck Hunt than the projectile-heavy sword fighter he's always been in Smash Bros. Kirby will not maintain the ability-sucking powers that define him in the Smash series, but if his own fighting game series has taught us anything, it's that he has a wide range of powerful abilities that, combined with his light weight and good mobility, would make him an interesting all-rounder. This is all in addition to various aesthetic changes. Link and Samus would sport their designs from their most recent outings by default, Pikachu Libre will be brought over from Smash in addition to the other costumes that the little rat has picked up over time, and heck, let's even bring in some designs from Nintendo's Jump to Motion Pictures. Mario, Donkey Kong, and Bowser would all look great sporting their big screen appearances. Oh yeah, I guess I forgot to mention, but I'm also bringing King Koopa over. Again, he would be similar to his Smash incarnation as a slow bruiser, but I want to lean more into the wrestling angle that the last couple entries have adopted. He's already got a drop kick and belly flop, just imagine what a suplex would be like with that great big shell of his. Finally, I want to bring in the Inklings. It's kinda hard to not include these guys, considering how quickly Splatoon has shot up the list of Nintendo's most valuable franchises. But there are a lot of unique attributes that they could bring to this game. Letting them cover the stage in ink would provide great mobility options, specifically letting them quickly cross to the other side of their opponent in a setting that would make it an invaluable tool. As well, there's a cavalcade of different weapons that could be brought in, with ones like the Paint Roller, Splatbrella, Splatana Stamper, and Explosher all providing unique and interesting utility, and that's before you get into any sub-weapons. And believe it or not, in terms of Nintendo characters I'm bringing over from Smash, that's it. A little shocking, right? The way I see it, this is a unique opportunity to give some time in the sun to characters that unfortunately never received their invitation in the mail, and that means leaving a lot of Smash mainstays behind. Maybe in a sequel or even DLC, but for this base roster, let's keep things a little spicy. As Thorgy likes to say,
"You can't just have the faces, you gotta have the freaks."
But before we get into Nintendo's backlog, there's a whole other company I've got to cover the basics for. Unlike Nintendo, who only has a few characters on this roster that have appeared in fighting games in a more traditional style, Capcom's significant history with fighting games means that not only have a lot more of their characters been used in that setting, but also their given playstyles are much more set in stone. You're not gonna see me trying to significantly revamp Ryu or Chun-Li's movesets. I'll leave that to Capcom themselves. Oh yeah, I'm including Ryu and Chun-Li in this roster. The two characters that have been in literally every single Capcom Vs. game ever are in this game. Shocking, I know. One character that, famously so, has missed out on an entry, but I think is a no-brainer, is the Blue Bomber. Mega Man would occupy a spot kinda similar to Mario, with standard weight and mobility, being generally easy to pick up, but this time with an emphasis on projectiles. And from one Mega Man to another, Zero would be a great rushdown fighter, with awesome mobility options and close quarters laser sword attacks, making for a fun, aggressive playstyle, at the cost of defenses. A couple more major beloved series, Dante from Devil May Cry, and the Hunter from Monster Hunter. These two have been staples of Capcom's lineup for a while, and their presence in crossover material speaks for itself. In a sort of opposite way, Morrigan has become a Capcom flagship character almost completely through crossovers, her series having been in the ground for the better part of the last 20 years. And for as crazy as he is, this roster just wouldn't be complete without Phoenix Wright. Will he play the same as he did in MVC 3, or be totally different? Who knows, but I'm sure he'll be insane. Alright, we've got 8 Nintendo characters and 8 Capcom characters on the board. From here, I'll be alternating between my picks for each. There will be some familiar faces, but as a general rule, I would advise you to expect the unexpected. One of the guys I would have lumped in as obligatory has actually never been in a Versus game. We've gotten Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Albert Wesker, and Nemesis, but never Leon S. Kennedy. Kind of unbelievable considering how beloved him and his games are. Well, okay, maybe not that one. That one either. Okay, you know what I mean. The remake of RE2 brought Leon back to his roots, and RE4 re-cemented his place as a Capcom legend. He'll play with a lot of melee moves, with his knife and hand-to-hand skills, and also have access to some fun projectile options. Sparkshot, anyone? If you want to include another Mario character, what would be your guess? Maybe someone like Wario, Rosalina, Bowser Jr.? Nah, gotta go deeper. Paper Mario? Captain Toad? Or Nabbit? Weirder. Queen Bean? Il Piantissimo? Or Pink Gold Baby Daisy? Okay, maybe not quite that weird. Professor Elvin Gadd is a character that I have a bit of an irrational love for. Debuting in Luigi's Mansion, it seemed like Nintendo was setting him up to be the next big Mario character, giving him spin-off appearances and even tying his technology into Mario Sunshine. More than 20 years on though, my man has pretty much been relegated to Luigi's Mansion sequels and only ever been playable in Mario Maker. The first one. Nothing says Nintendo doesn't care about a character like leaving their only playable appearance on the Wii U. Well, damn it, I care, and I want to see EGAD in Nintendo vs. Capcom. As the creator of the Poltergust, Flood, and Bowser Jr.'s Magic Paintbrush, the Nutty Professor would make use of all three in his moveset. I imagine him riding around on the Super Poltergust 3001, using the paintbrush as a projectile on his enemies, before using Flood's rocket nozzle to fly straight up in the air, avoiding oncoming attacks. Maybe he could even pull out Luigi to help in the fight. But then again, that may just make the Luigi fans even saltier. From one spooky character to another, y'all saw the thumbnail, so I'm sure you've been waiting for this one. If I had to take a stab at what character I think is most likely to be included in the next Capcom Vs. game, I would have to say Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village. She was literally getting people to cosplay her before the game even came out, and while there may be specific reasons why she gained so much attention, I think she's a more than worthy inclusion into this game. In terms of how she'd be in gameplay, first, she has to be tall. Like, the tallest character in the game by a pretty significant margin. Along with this, she'd also be one of the slower fighters, with limited mobility options all around. What counters these weaknesses, though, are her claws. Her moveset would be based around slashing attacks, all of which would have a significant amount of range to them. In addition, anyone who's played Village knows that she can turn into a dragon. Using the full transformation as a super move is obvious, but I'm also thinking that we could take a page from Corrin's playbook and have individual parts of her body transform for different attacks. Ol Alcina is not the only new villain from 2021 that I've decided to include, however. With 2D Metroid having taken a nap for nearly 20 years, it was great to see that not only had Metroid Dread not skipped a beat in terms of atmosphere and exploration, but it also brought along a badass new villain. Ravenbeak would be an absolute monster of a fighter in Nintendo vs. Capcom. The combination of great air mobility by way of his wings and the massive projectiles he can fire off ensure that a fight with him will not be easy. With that said though, those attacks will all have a significant amount of cooldown attached to them, so an evasive character, or even one with a high defense, won't have a problem taking advantages of those opportunities to win the day. These last few fighters have been on the gloomier side of things. What better way to rectify that than the literal god of the sun? Amaterasu has already made a playable appearance in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, so her playstyle is already established. But just to summarize, most of her moves will be based around slashes from the Divine Retribution mirror that she carries on her back. In addition, she can use the Celestial Brush to create marks on the screen as a sort of projectile. To give this new version of her that much more flair, maybe the devs can take a page out of Okami developer Hideki Kamiya's later work, The Wonderful 101, and allow the player to control the Celestial Brush with the analog stick, ultimately functioning similar to Ness's PK Thunder from Smash Bros. Speaking of brushstrokes, here's what I see being one of my most eyebrow-raising picks. So, Kirby has had a lot of friends over the years, from mainstays like Meta Knight and Bandana Waddle Dee, to less prevalent ones like Gooey and DeRoach. Out of all of these options though, I'm going with the most unassuming one. On her own, Adeline doesn't seem like much. She's small, slow, and her physical attacks are weak. She's able to call out Ribbon to help with her air mobility, but that's about the extent of it. However, when Adeline has access to her canvas to paint on, she becomes a force to be reckoned with. Here's how I see this working. When the match begins, Adeline's canvas will be locked to her starting position. When she's next to it, she can use her special moves to conjure up a variety of different enemies and objects from the Kirby series. For example, one of her weaker specials could summon a Bronto Burt to fly across the screen a la the Medusa heads from Castlevania. There will be a whole host of these abilities, each creating a different sort of projectile. This creates a playstyle where Adeline will mostly be locked to her canvas, using her projectiles to stun the opponent, which she can then capitalize on with her finishing moves. If we're talking about cutesy characters though, I've got a big swing for y'all. It's easy to forget due to the game's obscurity, but Zack and Wiki Quest for Barbaros Treasure was one of the first major third-party Wii exclusives, and it took great advantage of the Wii Remote in a time when people were actually still receptive to that. The hook of the game was that Wiki could be shaken like a bell to turned the various animals found in each stage into a different tool for puzzle solving, and this can be incorporated into the pair's moveset twofold. First, the actual items from the game can be incorporated, with functions like the Slither Gripper working as a long-range grab, or the Mole Drill being planted in the ground to attack the enemy if they step on it. As well, Wiki's Bell Attack could be used to briefly turn the opponent into a tool. This could be the game's equivalent to Lord Raptor's Hell Dunk from Darkstalkers, or even Kirby's Hats from the Smash Bros. Series, with every character on the roster having a unique transformation. Maybe they could even have a special where they call out one of their own teammates to use them as a weapon, at the cost of some of that character's health. I may have decided to leave the Villager off this roster, but that doesn't mean we're going without any Animal Crossing characters. And while I really wanted to let my personal biases win the day and include Dom or Bracolo, I think KK Slider is the option that provides the most potential. Being a musician, he can incorporate moves like bashing the opponent with his guitar or throwing records at them, but on a deeper level, he can incorporate rhythm into his fighting style. Maybe for his special moves, he could have a few different songs that he would begin to play, and then if you can time his attacks along with them, they'd hit for extra damage. And what a host of fun attacks you'd have to use, incorporating concepts from the various KK Slider album covers that the player can collect in New Horizons. He could summon a wave to surf across the stage before hitting the opponent with a step kick and finishing off the combo by dropping a giant guitar on top of them, all in time with the rhythm. Our last carryover from an existing Versus game, Beautiful Joe would have a relatively straight-up fighting style. Solid speed and power, along with the ability to launch his opponents into the air and the aerial attacks to back it up. He's got a few tricks up his sleeves, with bombs and a boomerang that he can use for stage control, but the most interesting of them are his time warping abilities. By using his special moves, Joe can create a fast forward to speed up his own movement, a slowdown to increase the time that hitboxes are active for, or even record to create something of a double of himself on the field. These moves would need to be properly balanced, of course. A significant amount of cooldown would be tied to each, and in addition, Joe's opponent can take advantage of them as a means to attack him. Even still, Beautiful Joe would be a fun, tricky character with a ton of potential for players willing to learn him. Of all of the characters introduced in Zelda Breath of the Wild, I don't think any of them have built the same level of fan admiration as the new King of the Zoras, Sidon. As the roster's sole spear wielder, he would naturally have a lot of range to his physical attacks, though this would come at the cost of the size of some of those moves' hitboxes. In addition, we could bring in a good amount of the moves from his playable appearance in Age of Calamity, which heavily features him attacking with constructs made from water. In particular, he could ride around on the backs of waterfish for a dash attack and create a typhoon that will slowly move its way across the stage. And of course, with the best smile in the game, his moveset wouldn't be complete without some kind of stun attack by way of him showing off his pearly whites. Seriously, the dude's like Chip Skylark with that smile. While I'm talking about one Zelda character, I might as well go into detail about the other one. A long-time request for Smash, Skull Kid is finally getting his chance at a crossover fighter in Nintendo vs. Capcom. He'd be extremely light, giving him both great mobility, but also weak defenses. To counteract this though, by using Majora's Mask, he'll have the ability to fire out a variety of super powerful projectiles, whether they be balls of dark energy or a screeching shockwave that covers the entire stage. And I don't even think I have to explain what his super move would be. Up until now, the Ghosts and Goblins series has only been represented in Capcom Versus games by Arthur and Firebrand, but there's another protagonist from the series that I think is prime for inclusion. Maximo was a duology of games on the PS2 that served as a spiritual successor to Ghosts and Goblins, adapting the series' trademark controller-throwing gameplay into 3D. By default, Maximo would be one of the simpler characters to come to grips with. Similar to someone like Ike in Smash Bros., he would be slow and fight with a series of powerful sword slashes. in addition to his shield giving him greater defensive capabilities. To add a twist, however, Maximo would function as a stance change fighter, with his Grim Reaper transformation giving him much greater speed at the cost of his defenses. Fire Emblem is an interesting series to pull characters from due to its constantly shifting cast of characters. We've seen how Smash Bros. Decided to address this issue, and to avoid a similar amount of fallout, I decided I needed to find one character that I thought could solidly represent the whole series. For a long time I had Lyn on that spot, and I felt like her inclusion in a game like this was long overdue. But the more I thought about it, the most obvious choice is Alear. The series' most recent Lord class, Alear's physical moves wouldn't be anything to write home about, consisting of pretty standard sword slashes. Like Fire Emblem Engage itself, however, the main draw of Alear as a fighter is the way that their moveset incorporates characters from throughout the series' history. For each of their moves, the player could execute a button combination beforehand that would call out a Fire Emblem Legacy character, giving the attack extra properties. Maybe with Micaiah, Alear could regain some extra health at a critical moment, or Hector could swing his axe upwards to launch the opponent into the air and begin a combo. Even just looking at the summons that already exist within Fire Emblem Engage, there's a host of different options to pick from, all with different potential effects. Lyn could even be brought in, though she would continue to be always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Speaking of characters fighting with phantom partners, Ghost Trick's new remaster makes this the perfect time to bring in a tag team of Lyn and Sissel as this game's stand fighter. Adapting a character from a non-combat focused game into a fighter can be tough, but in this case it's pretty easy to figure out. Lyn, your main character on the field, can run and jump around, attacking her opponents with standard physical attacks. Sissel, however, is dead, and in Ghost Trick you control him by way of manipulating the items in the environment. I thought about having Lyn be totally computer controlled while the player is only focused on helping her, but I think tying the duo's special moves into the various manipulations seen throughout Ghost Trick would ultimately create a more balanced fighter. Some interactions from the game itself, like swinging a barrier arm or dropping a wrecking ball, could be directly ported over, and maybe each stage could have unique interactable elements as well. Decidueye has got to be one of the coolest Pokemon in recent memory, and with its new form introduced in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I think it's primed for an inclusion in Nintendo vs. Capcom. This version of Decidueye primarily acts as a rushdown fighter, preferring to get into its opponent's face with a barrage of powerful kicking attacks. Even with its shorter wingspan, it still has great aerial capabilities, being able to launch its opponents into the air for combos. Finally, it still has some tricks from the classic design up its sleeve, with the ability to fire arrows from a bow created by its wings. As a rushdown fighter, Decidueye would be lacking in defenses, but its speed and power should still make them a fun character to play around with. I really want to include a character from Power Stone, but picking out one specifically is a bit of a challenge. Should I go for Edward Falcone, the de facto lead of the game? Too generic. Gourmand? Too creepy. Galuda? Look, I really don't feel like getting cancelled over this video. And besides, it's not like there's already a mummy on the roster. Just in terms of general appearance, Jack is a pretty strange character. He's the only fighting game character I can think of who crawls around the ground instead of running. Like there's quadrupeds, and then there's actively choosing to be a quadruped. This would obviously affect his hitboxes, forcing the opponent to focus on low attacks to even have a chance of landing a hit. In terms of his actual offensive capabilities, he's mostly reliant on his two short knives, and so he needs to use that movement as a way to keep close to the opponent and ensure he's landing hits. In addition to all of this, Jack's super move would work differently from the rest of the cast. All of the other fighters just have a meter that builds up over time, but in the spirit of Power Stone, throughout the match, gems will appear throughout the battlefield. Once he's picked all of them up, Jack will turn into his Power Change form, gaining an increase in his overall power. Other characters cannot pick up the gems themselves, but they can attack and eventually destroy them, so it's a way to incorporate some of the quirky gameplay chaos of Power Stone into this game. When ARMS was being promoted, it really seemed like Nintendo was trying to recapture the lightning in a bottle success of Splatoon. While I don't think it ever managed that, take a look at which series has gotten another entry in the time since then, I still think the game was a big enough success to warrant including a character here. In choosing which fighter to add, I asked myself a question. When picking a character from ARMS, should I choose a character that fights with their arms? No. Unlike every other character in her game, Twintelle fights with her hair in the shape of giant arms. With how long those things are, she would have crazy range on her physical attacks, kind of similarly to Lady Dimitrescu. And also like Lady Dimitrescu, she has certain other qualities that I think are the main source of her popularity. Just the fact that I included both of them in this video makes me a little concerned to go down to the comments section. Stay classy, y'all. Anyways, another one of Twintelle's key traits in ARMS is her evasiveness. She has multiple abilities that allow her to quickly dodge her opponent's attacks and position herself to counter. In this way, she would have very good mobility, but she's not at all a rushdown fighter. To effectively play Twintelle, you'd need to carefully watch your opponent and then punish them on their mistakes. If you couldn't tell by my last Capcom pick, I'm a fan of the Sega Dreamcast, and since the only bigger fan of that console than me was Capcom, I think it's fitting to choose another one of the characters that they brought to prominence on the console. Cannon Spike was an arcade-style 2D shooter, nearly a bullet hell really, built using Sega's new Naomi board. Most of the cast was made up of pre-existing Capcom characters like Cammy, Arthur, and even Mega Man, but there were a couple originals in the midst. For this pick, I'm going to go with the Sonic Riders reject that forgot to wear his fursuit, Shiba, as well as his pet robot, Akabi. Riding on a hoverboard that I'm sure wasn't at all inspired by the second Back to the Future movie, Shiba would have pretty good mobility, though his movement on the ground is very slippery. His physical attributes in general aren't anything to write home about, but like most of the characters here, there's a hook to his moveset. With Akabi at his command, Shiba acts as the game's puppet fighter. My understanding is that this is a pretty common archetype for fighting games, but I'm a simpleton and my only frame of reference for it is Rosalina in Smash, so that's the example I'm gonna use. Shiba can send Akabi out to different parts of the stage, where it will then stay and perform moves in accordance with Shiba's actions. When used effectively together, a player can bounce their opponent back and forth between the two to the point where they won't even be able to move. I just knew that I needed to add another Pokemon, preferably a legendary. Even with this specification though, there's so many great choices. Mewtwo is the obvious pick, which is both a benefit and a drawback, or for basically the same effect I could have chosen Deoxys. A good amount of the choices are maybe too weird to really work, like how the hell do you make Rayquaza function as a fighter? But I'm pretty sure there aren't any other quadrupeds carrying a giant sword on their mouth on the roster yet. There's one in Dark Souls, but that's besides the point. At a first glance, Zacian seems more like a boss than a playable fighter. It's huge, both tall and long, and it has the ability to hit you with powerful slashes from the other side of the screen. With that said, the frame data on those slashes is very unwieldy, forcing its player to learn how to use it effectively. Its combat has often been described as having a lot of flow, almost like a dance, and so I think the emphasis should be on comboing the opponent into submission. And finally, for its super move, Zamazenta could quickly appear to perform a powerful attack in accordance with it. And for the very last character on the roster, this one's gonna require a bit more context. Okay, so in the early 2000s, as an attempt to convince consumers that the GameCube would be more third-party friendly than its predecessor, Nintendo signed a deal with Capcom to ensure the exclusivity of a variety of games to the little lunchbox. The main effect of this was that Resident Evil became essentially a Nintendo exclusive for the generation, but there was also the mythic Capcom 5, a quintet of Capcom games that definitely would never be released on any other console. You mean the GameCube isn't the only console that you can play Resident Evil 4 on? I'm shocked. Of these 5 games, I've already included Leon from Resident Evil 4 and the titular Beautiful Joe, so you may be expecting me to bring in a character from Killer 7 or PNO3. They both have the same problem though. Basically all of the choices are just people that shoot guns. Not really the most interesting source material for a moveset. But wait, that's only 4 of the 5 games. What about the last one? Well, unfortunately, that game got cancelled. And if you've been watching this video, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. The rumor for quite a while was that Dead Phoenix had been transformed into a new Kid Icarus game on the Wii. So with that in mind, I think it's fair to take some inspiration from Pit's appearance in Smash Bros. The Phoenix would basically always be airborne, being able to zip around in the air with ease. He would have a variety of projectile attacks, ranging from a bow to whatever it is he's holding in this trailer. Plus, the people in charge of writing the story had the opportunity to come up with their own characterization for him. After all, he has never appeared in a game before. And there you have it, the base roster for Nintendo vs. Capcom. I'm sure that word choice raised an eyebrow though, and now you're wondering, are you gonna do DLC?
Now! Yes! Maybe, but not right now.
Yeah, this roster has been fun, but I'm admittedly pretty burnt out on this concept right now. Maybe I'll do a part 2 at some point, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Even with that said, I'm proud of this roster. I think I managed to balance the 3 main food groups of a good fighting game roster together. Classic obvious picks, prominent new faces, and the weirdest things I could possibly think of. I would be lying if I said there was no incentive to show off my nerd knowledge with the writing of this video, but even still, I'm happy with the variety of different archetypes and playstyles that this roster has captured. But maybe you disagree. Maybe you're sickened by the exclusion of Captain Falcon, or disappointed to see Lynn snubbed once again. Well, if that's you, let me know in the comments. The whole point of making these videos is to have fun, and that only continues down there. So, with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, have a good rest of your day, and good night.